Oh, sorry. We had to go a little different route this time, so it's taking 1 second.
It says we're streaming live on Facebook. Okay, good. All right. Hi, everyone. It's Virginia Stanley coming to you from the old sod. Not true. The old sod known as Astoria, Queens. But who doesn't love a fun background of an Irish cottage? Anyway, I'm here with my fabulous colleague, Lainey Mays, and we are going to be talking historical fiction today. So joining us for this first half hour, we're going to do an author-editor interview for the whole hour. The first half hour will be Camille Aubray speaking with her editor, Rachel Kahan. So Rachel is executive editor at William Morrow. She's been there for 9 years, and she has edited many different books, historical fiction, historical nonfiction. Some of her authors include Beatriz Williams, who you'll hear from later, Judy Battalion, whose book Light of Days. You have heard from her at ALA. That book is astounding. It just went on sale last week. Susan Wiggs, you know her, Jenny Colgan, and Hidden Figures, Margot Lee Shetterly. Rachel Kahan is the editor of all these books and so many others. So today, Rachel will be speaking with Camille Aubray. Camille Aubray is the author of her first novel, is Cooking for Picasso, which was chosen for People Magazine's People Picks the New Best New Books, and it was an Indie Next Reading Group list. That was a novel of art, food, and the French Riviera about chefs, artists, mothers, daughters, famous people, and the mere mortals who love them. It's a fabulous jacket, too, by the way. I love that. As Chris Connolly says, come for the jacket, stay for the book. Love that. So Camille's new book, The GODMOTHERS, is a new novel about 4 remarkable women from very different backgrounds who become sisters-in-law in a glamorous New York family in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. It was chosen for Publishers Marketplace's Buzz Books Spring Summer 2021, and it was listed as well as BuzzFeed's 21 upcoming historical fiction books you're going to love, which is true. You're going to love it. One quick thing, Publishers Weekly says Aubrey delivers an addictive and tense multi-generational feminist romp through World War II era New York City, where a quartet of Italian sisters-in-law run a crime family. So Rachel, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and librarians and your wonderful authors today about their very different, but this, connective tissue between these books, this historical fiction where you learn so much and the pages fly. So with that, I will let you take it away. Camille, welcome so much to Library Love Fest, door to door. We thank you, and we wait to hear from you both.
Thank you. I am just thrilled to be here with other historical fiction lovers. Historical novels have always just held a really special place in my heart since I was a kid, and it's really what I gravitate towards as a reader and as an editor. So today we're going to be talking with 2 authors whose novels are coming out this summer, Camille Aubray and Beatriz Williams. And the thing that I really love about both of these books is that there is an element of the unexpected. Don't ever underestimate the heroines of these books. And we see them getting involved sort of inadvertently at first in some very typically male-dominated shady business, and then managing to thrive and survive all of the worst parts of those businesses. So there's just so much for readers to dig into and fall in love with these women's stories. Big Little Lies, I mean, you heard Virginia's description from PW, right? Like, I want to read that book. I fell in love with the concept of this book when I first heard about it. It's kind of like a Big Little Lies that's set in World War II era Greenwich Village. It's this really irresistible, suspenseful novel about 4 women who are part of a wealthy New York Italian family. And all of them have their own gifts, and they also have a lot of their own secrets. And they realize that they're going to have to take charge of the family's business when their husbands are forced to leave them during the war. So We're really lucky that we have Camille Aubray with us today. We're going to get into some conversations about the book. I've been looking forward to this. So Camille, welcome. It's so good to see you. And you have the best Zoom background that I've seen in a really long time.
Well, we try, right?
Right. So your novel is about these four women from various backgrounds. Three are sisters-in-law. One is actually the daughter of the Italian family in the book. And all of the action centers in Greenwich Village, which is a place that I think even if you don't live in New York, people just really have this sense of wonder about it. My grandparents actually lived there during World War II, and it's just a marvelous place. So what made you pick Greenwich Village, like at this particular moment of history?
Well, you know, I had worked in New York in television, and I was getting to know the city bit by bit. And Greenwich Village always had a special place in my heart for me. I even did some dancing for a while, Isadora Duncan dancing, believe it or not. And we were down in the village doing that. But what I love about it is the coziness of it. I mean, it's really a world unto itself. The low buildings, the cobbled streets, the little twists and turns, and the statelier buildings that I think of more as like the Henry James, New York. So it seemed like a good place for this oasis, for this family to live and to try to protect each other and take care of each other. But then you have the hustle and bustle of all of Manhattan and, you know, the boroughs around them. So the landmarks in the book, like the Copacabana Club, the majestic apartment building, Bergdorf Goodman, you know, all of that is around them. And yet they can retreat to these brownstones where they live. And this, you know, and try to have a way of taking care of each other, being a family.
So the action in this book really picks up when the husbands and the brothers in the family are in Europe during World War II. And the women kind of have to fill the vacuum of earning money and protecting the empire that the family has built. And they wind up taking on the family business, and it's not always on the right side of the law. So how do they manage to stay afloat in that very male dominated and often like really kind of a violent, scary world? Tell me about that.
Yes. Well, you know, the family that they've married into were originally going to be, you know, wine importers, and prohibition hit. And so they took on these other businesses like real estate and gambling, which is, you know, as you said, not quite on the right side of the law, but they did what they could to stay afloat. And then they built up these businesses. They had a jewelry store, they had, you know, various things. But what happens, I've discovered in my research, is that during this period, as these businesses started to thrive, you know, the more successful you got, the more attention you got. And you did not want the attention of the gangsters if you were running a restaurant, a shop, you know, because they would come in, they'd want to share the action. And they, you know, it was an extortion kind of thing, protection money, you know, so nothing bad will happen to you and your family and your store. So this is what the family was already getting kind of trapped into when these women arrived who married into the family, having no idea, you know, of the problems that their husbands were dealing with. But then gradually it starts to dawn on them and they say, you know, wow, this doesn't look too good, you know. And then when the husbands are gone and the husbands are saying, you know, you have to take over, you have to take care of the restaurant, you know, the jewelry shop, the other things, the buildings that we own. Then suddenly they are thrust into this world. And what they want to do is protect the family from it. They do not want to, you know, they're not the wives of the big bosses of the five family. These are just people who prospered and found themselves trapped under the thumb of these big shots.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these real life kind of gangsters of New York show up in the book. And it's really a lot of fun because I think that you create these really vivid characters who are purely made up and of your imagination and are the women of the story. But then you have these real life characters come stomping through, like Lucky Luciano and Albert Anastasia. And it's really watching the way the women handle these guys is kind of a master class for so many of us, I think, even now. So can you tell me, like, how, first of all, what kind of research did you do into these? I mean, this is part of a research craft question, but then also just an imagination question. How did you do research to envision these men and what these interactions might have been like. And then, like, how did you imagine these men would have treated these women? How would they have seen these women in sort of a very macho 1950s world?
Sure. Well, I do research, and librarians probably understand this even better than the rest of us do. You put out these feelers, you look at books, you look at old newspapers. Old newspapers are wonderful because you capture the vernacular. And sometimes the newspaper accounts have errors, they're not entirely right, but they're very colorful and they're very vivid. And then, of course, just reading the writings about it. But also, from time to time in New York, there are people who remember what it was like. There are people who say, you could go to a nightclub and you might bump into these guys and they might be very charming at first, So that's the anecdotes from people. There's the books, there's the media. And some of it was even actually filmed, some of the later trials with these guys. So you could hear how they sounded, For instance, Frank Costello had that raspy voice, which I'm told Marlon Brando kind of channeled, when he did The Godfather. So, all of that is there if you're looking for it. And I just love the serendipity of research. You're starting out in one direction. It's almost like looking in a dictionary. You're looking up one word and you get distracted by other things that you find. Or if you're looking up a recipe in a cookbook and you get distracted by something else, but it all comes together in the end. And then you start to really hear their voices. You kind of know what they would do if you put them in situations, as you said, with my characters, who were fictional. But that guy, for instance, that Albert Anastasia was the head of what they called Murder Inc., which was basically a hit squad. And that was his thing. And he was a scary dude, but then you've got Frank Costello, who was sort of suave, and he's the one who knew the politicians. Again, I think they channeled some of that for The Godfather too, that he had these political connections. He was more quasi-respectable, and he was, trying to be more like everybody else, And then you've got Lucky Luciano, who was in the earlier part of the organization of it. So now you've got 5 families and they're organized and they kind of cooperate with each other. This is your territory, this is my territory. But of course, these skirmishes happen, these rivalries. But basically, it was Luciano who organized them and said, we have to be, like U.S. Steel, we have to be a corporation. So those are the different personalities of some of these people. And you learn pretty quickly how they differ from each other. Now, how they would react to my characters, to the women, well, with these guys, it's business, it's business. So they know. The one advantage that my characters had is that the family they married into was somewhat known to these guys and somewhat respected because they were what they called earners, they could get money from them. So the women had that aura a bit, but they're dealing with situations, and women, at least in that era, they don't respond with being necessarily aggressive and competitive and the way a man might. Women are trying to do workarounds, women are trying to figure out how, because their primary thing was to protect their children. They don't want their children to grow up in that world, and they make a decision together collectively, these 4 women, that they want to ease out of this. And they're not asking their husband's permission to do this because the husbands aren't around, but they have a goal. So once they have a goal, they're just figuring out, how do we get there without, bloodshed, without, being attacked. And that's really where the little twists and turns of the story are.
Mm-hmm. At the start of the book, we find out that the family business is a little bit of a secret that gets kind of peeled back. Each of these women over time sort of figures out what goes on. And each of these 4 women, like, they're all harboring secrets of their own. They all kind of arrive with a whole backstory, which is one of the things that I love about this book. And they have secrets that they don't really want the rest of the family to know. And those things start getting peeled away too as the book goes on. And the thing that I was thinking about when I read it too is, women of that era really, there were such heavy expectations about how they were supposed to act. And, life was supposed to follow a certain pattern, and you'd have a certain behavior was always expected of you. And do you feel like the women in this book kind of lived with more secrets than women do today? Was that something that you kind of had to consider as you were writing each of these characters? Like, what is it that she's not revealing to the outside world?
Yes, I think so. I think, because just simply the media that we have, there's so many ideas that are out now that were not in circulation then. And so they would have struck people as strange. So these women were, each one, if we take them, Lucy, who comes from Ireland, she had her, I don't want to do spoilers here, but she had her secrets and she didn't want to bring that into the family because she thought they might judge her. Maybe her husband would look at her in a different way, you know. Um, and then you have Patrina, who is the daughter of the family, and she had her problems, and she doesn't want the other women to know. It's more, I think there was more shame tied to things in those days for women. It was much easier to shame a woman that you're not following, the tried and true way to do things. So they didn't know whether they could trust each other with their secrets. They were afraid of being looked at differently. And all four of them have something that they want to hide, but in the way of secrets, these things start to surface. It's like ghosts coming back, and how they have to deal with that. That's, really the nub of the story of four women putting aside grudges, not judging each other. You know how sisters-in-law can be when somebody new comes into the family.
Yes, I do.
When you contrast that against this terrifying background, that they better pull together or they're going to, sink. So it's kind of, to me, it's the fascination is how women overcome those little petty things that they do, and instead, give each other the benefit of the doubt, care about each other, help each other.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we do have some questions from librarians, and I do want to get to some of those as well. Rachel, is that okay if I hop in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay. And whichever ones we should be getting. There's so many people watching. Susan Riley says, Camille, how did you come up with the framework for this story? Have you based any of the characters on real life people?
Okay. Well, I think of, inspiration doesn't come from just like one spot. It's sort of like spokes in a wheel, and then they meet in the middle and you have your story. So I was doing this research and I knew I wanted to write about this period, this place, smack in the middle, somewhere along the way, I came across a quote from Mario Puzo, who said that every time the Godfather opened his mouth, he heard his mother speaking. All of the wisdom, all of the things that the Godfather said, he revealed were actually things that he learned from his mother. And I said, wow, just, when you think of how people quote that movie all the time, and it's kind of a guy, man's man world thing. And that to me, I started really thinking about that. I said, well, wait a minute. If you go back and look at the dialogue then, and you start thinking, I said, well. But he also said that the wisdom that these women had were devalued. They weren't really appreciated in that time period. So I said, okay, and I know this because I know how women are. I mean, let's face it, even today, women are not entirely appreciated, mothers in particular. We sort of take for granted that they make things happen. They make Christmas happen. They make Easter happen. But, so I said, okay, now I kind of, I think I know how I can really explore this. So I think that was a big turning point.
We have a question from Beth Thomas, who wrote into me. She said, I'm always curious when authors write novels like this, which feature an ensemble of lead characters, if you ever feel the need to balance out the amount of storyline given to each, and if you end up having a favorite among the group.
Well, I love them all, really. But I know what she's asking. And I think that what worked for me was that I had them coming from all their different directions, but they're meeting in a family. So they're in this, even though they live in, different apartments and houses, they still have the dinner table, where they're all there. And so that brings them together. And, you do have to do a balancing act of, now these people are talking, like the two godmothers are going off this way, the other two are over here, and then you mix it up. I don't like to have them be too paired all the time with the same friend, I like to create circumstances where the ones who are maybe not that friendly, who suddenly are together. And that's what happened in a number of circumstances. So that's fun for me. I like doing that.
Okay. Carla Sudo, it's sort of a little bit of the other question. Was it hard to interweave the fictional characters with well-known figures?
Oh, well, no, I wouldn't say it was hard. I'd say, once you have a real sense of who everybody is, whether it's the real life guys or whether it's the women that you've created and their husbands, I enjoyed creating those husbands too, because they're good guys. They're not, swaggering gangster type. They're good guys, you know, they love their family, they love their parents, and they love their wives. So I didn't really have a hard time with it. I could see them merging because after all, that's what, you know, New York is, you know, it's a place where all different kinds of people come together. So.
Let's see. Were the godmothers based on anyone you know? And do you have, well, then there's the favorite question again. They want
Yeah.
to know who your favorite is.
Well, you know, I had an Aunt Rose, and she grew up in the suburbs outside of New York, a very genteel, very quiet then. I mean, you know, they're a little more happening now, but at that time, you know, there wasn't any kind of nightlife. You went to the country club, you went to bed, you know what I mean? And so she thought it was a big adventure every now and then to go into New York City. It was so, you know, exciting to be at these different places. She had a particular skill of being able to add up these like 3-column numbers like really fast. She just had this mathematical skill. But you know, we've talked about that time period. She didn't become a mathematician, she became a mother, you know, that's how it was then. But I used that skill in one of the characters because I thought it was kind of interesting to have someone who has an affinity for numbers. And my character Philomena, she sees people as numbers. She kind of sees, when she sees the numbers and she thinks about the family, she thinks of so-and-so is kind of like a 7, so-and-so is more like a 5, you know? So I was able to use that, you know, and give her some interesting flavor of how she, you know, was trying to balance how she felt about the other family members.
Philomena is actually my favorite of the godmothers. If we can have a favorite,
Sure.
she's mine.
There's still so many more questions, but I don't want to miss the people want to know about the research. You know, how long did your research take? What was that all about, Corinne, Jacob, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes for me to, people do ask me, how long did it take to write? How long did it take to research? There's such an overlap, you know, and I sort of forget about it. You know, I sort of, you know, don't remember like when I started, but I would say you really have to figure on, you know, a year and a half of, you know, everything coming forward, you know, but I always start these stories in my head, you know, and I wake up in the middle of the night and I scribble things on Post-its because if there's any budding writers out there, write it down when you think of something at night because you will not remember it in the morning, I promise you. And you do want to remember things. So a lot of that builds, you know, my mentor, Margaret Atwood, talked about it as finding the voice of the story, you know, and suddenly you hear the character talk, but that takes time. And you have to get past that iceberg of research because what's in the book is just the tip of the iceberg. There was so much more research and you don't want to have all that in there. You just want to have what's really important, you know.
Right. Lady?
Yeah, so Todd Kruger said, did you use any personal experiences being the in-law or as a person welcoming or not welcoming a new in-law into the family?
I'm lucky. I have a very nice sister-in-law. So that wasn't an issue for me. No. But you know, I have girlfriends, I have people I've grown up with, colleagues and stuff, and they have told me stories, you know, how when, you know, people build up a head of steam, I can't believe what she said, you know, things like that. So you know, we all know those stories. So you know, it just comes, I think, collectively, you know, from just understanding how people function and, you know, what's in their hearts.
I think that's one of the things that I really like about working with novelists is that they tend to be such really close observers of human behavior. And then they're able to channel that into these stories that readers understand without maybe even realizing everything that's been observed when it's laid out for them in a story.
Right.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think that, again, the relationship between editor and author is just such a unique one. And with time dwindling and more questions, but Rachel, I wanted to just bring it back to you for a second, just, you know, ask you if there was anything in particular you wanted viewers to know about, you know, your working relationship or the approach to the manuscript and sort of inside baseball.
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, with every author, there is this, you know, you get a book and it has an idea and it has characters and it has a voice. And those are all the things that kind of call out to you when you first open up the manuscript. And then you have to think, okay, you know, how can I make this book sort of the quintessence of all of these things? How is it going to be the best possible book that it can be? And Camille and I worked on a lot of different fronts with kind of the storyline, with all the characters, with adding a historical detail, because I had a lot of questions when I read the book. There's lots of different things going on as each of the characters is unfolded. And what Camille was doing was this very elaborate and acutely observed ensemble of different women. And I think for me as a reader, it's so enjoyable, and it would make such a good movie with so many good roles for actors. But I think that, you know, I'm always just looking to polish up the book. I'm lucky that Camille, even though this is only her second book, is a really strong storyteller with a strong voice. So in some cases, you just kind of have to get out of that author's way and prompt them to bring the voices and the story to the forefront. And that's really all we did. The editorial experience on this book was, I thought, you know, just really easy and a really good one, because everything that the book needed was there when I got it. And it was just the process of refining it.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. It was, you know, and your editor is your lifeline, because, you know, you want to make sure that you're heading in the right direction. And even to put another metaphor, they're kind of like the North Star, you know, so you know where you are and you're anchored.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I had never thought of it that way before. I sometimes think of myself as being kind of like a combination of a stern basketball coach and a high school guidance counselor.
Well, that's a good combo. You've got the yin and yang. Well, I hope that the librarians who are listening will enjoy the book, and I hope you'll remember to nominate us for library reads, because that deadline's coming up. So
It sure is. The book goes on sale on June 15th, which makes May 1st the deadline to vote for library reads.
Yes.
We have lots of information here on the site. And also, don't forget, I forgot to mention Camille's website, which is really cool. So if you go to CamilleAubray.com, there's lots of information there about what inspired her book, and there's information about her previous book, and beautiful. It's just chock full, so you can really dive down and probably never come back out for a long time.
and recipes.
And recipes, yes, recipes, right.
One reviewer said, don't read this book on an empty stomach because you're going to get hungry. That was about my previous novel, but I think there's plenty of food in this one.
For sure, for sure. Camille, thank you so much. Congratulations on the Godmothers, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with everybody today.
Oh, lovely.
Rachel,
Thank
that
you,
was lovely.
Camille.
Congrats.
Love it.
Okay, take good care. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye, folks.
Bye.
I'll find my way out here. And
Love, library love.
We'll
That
show
was
the
super
cover
fun.
one more time.
There we go. Beautiful. Come for the jacket, stay for the
Such a
book.
great jacket, right? Don't you want to see that movie? Don't you want to read that book?
Totally. That's arresting. That's really something. That's quite striking, I think. Thank you, Rachel. That was a really cool interview.
It's a
I
great
mean,
book.
Yeah. That was just terrific. I mean, you learn so much from, you know, just an in-depth, real rich content interview. And I always think it's really interesting to hear from your perspective on you know, the whole process. So, and now,
Well, there's more where that came from. Let's talk to Beatrice.
wow, certainly is 2:31. We're practically right on time. Let's bring on Beatrice Williams.
Hello. Am I
We hear
here?
you.
Oh,
We
sorry.
don't see you.
There we go.
Hi.
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 Hi. Hello, everybody.
How are you?
Oh, well, obviously I'm in the wrong spot. Where are you? You look like you got Cornwall
Tipperary.
you or something, or Scotland maybe. I don't know.
I'm in Ireland.
Ireland. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Lucky. Well, I can tell you're not actually there, but it still
How
puts
do you know
us
that?
in the mood, right?
I don't know what makes you say that. I'm in
Uh-huh.
Ireland, Queens.
I
Beatrice, you remember Lainey?
yes. How are you? Oh my gosh.
Good, how are you?
And Rachel, of course, your
I
editor.
vaguely remember Rachel, but it's been so long.
Ah, I know. It's been a whole 2 days since I sent you an email.
Yes, I know, but I mean, since we've been face to face considerably more time.
So
Yeah,
long.
I know. I'm trying to think. Last time did we see you at? Well, it feels like Philadelphia. I don't know. Is
I
that
think
right?
so. I know. I feel like I know, and I
LA.
feel like I really miss my library team, and I love going to these. Like, remember back in the day, we would actually go to these conferences and conventions and actually meet people and
I
get to
know.
sign books. And yes, I'm
Well, believe me, we so appreciate, and so do the librarians who are all watching and thrilled to hear about your new book. All of the support that you've shown libraries by coming to conferences, by making visits at libraries and programming. And so they know. And if you don't know, I don't know where you've been, because Beatrice has been everywhere.
I know, and honestly, it's mutual, because I am so I can't tell you how many readers I've picked up through they've read the book at a library, and it's really exciting to see how many librarians, and I just can't tell you. I have 4 children to raise and to put through college, so I deeply appreciate all the support and from librarians who have put my books into readers' hands. It's really, libraries are a big part of my, reading experience growing up. So it's just wonderful to see that continue and handed down. So thank you all, wonderful librarians.
That's lovely. That's lovely. So let me do a little brief intro, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rachel so that we can hear from both of you about the process of this new book. So, best-selling author, 13 novels, am I correct? Perhaps.
No, I try not to count anymore.
Just 113 then. Just say
This is the 13th by my count that you and I have done together.
Yeah.
If we count the Team W books.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. Yes, exactly.
That's
And then there were a few really good books that I was not the editor of, but we don't need to talk about those.
No. Let's stay in the present.
That's
Yes.
right.
Okay. Her Last Flight, The Wicked Redhead, The Golden Hour, as well as All the Ways We Said Goodbye. Co-written by Lauren Willig and Karen White. You spent several years in New York and London as a corporate strategy consultant.
Yes.
For pursuing your passion for historical fiction. Well, then here you go. You're on the historical fiction episode of Door to Door. Okay, let's get to it. In Our Woman in Moscow, this is a beautiful jacket, by the way. Oh my God. Gripping, profoundly human story of Cold War espionage and family devotion. This is a compelling tale of spycraft, love, and family. It crosses the action and suspense of The Huntress with the detail and period glamour of Our Man in Moscow. Bill Ott, perhaps you do not know this yet, Beatriz Williams, because it just came in. Bill Ott, a former publisher of Booklist magazine, and now he is reviewing and has all of his feet in Booklist still, just gave this a wonderful review, saying Beatriz Williams, yes, I'm a little bit paraphrasing because I'm just chopping up to the very end, where he says that Beatriz Williams effectively juggles the narrative between the points of view of Ruth, Iris, and a Russian KGB agent, which we'll find out about, moves back and forth in time to build all the principles into full-blooded characters while delivering detail-rich portraits of wartime Italy, glittery 50s Manhattan, and grayed out Moscow.
Wow, fantastic. I am so glad to hear that.
Yes, and before I turn it over to you, I do want to say, for everybody who has access to Edelweiss, you must go to this page on Edelweiss later, because there is a great behind the book piece. There's a great Q&A. There's great content there about book clubs. It goes on. So rich in content. Please don't forget to check that out. And with that, I hand it over to Rachel, your wonderful editor, speaking with Beatrice, your wonderful author.
So Our Woman in Moscow is this really gripping story about spycraft and loyalty and betrayal. And there's many layers of the loyalty and betrayal. It's between sisters and husbands and wives and nations. And it's, like I said before, one of these novels where you never want to underestimate the women involved. And it's also, like I said, it's like the 13th novel that Beatrice and I have worked on together. And every time Beatrice turns in a book, I'm like, oh my God, she did it again. And she's been teasing me about her
Like
new
Britney
book,
Spears,
too, which I hear,
Oops.
right? And so every time I get it, I think, wow, what am I in for this time? And I absolutely love this book. It, in some ways, I think it might be my favorite because I knew the time that you were writing it, and it came to me sort of during this very dark year that we were editing. And yet it is kind of a luminous book in a lot of ways, and really speaks to the human heart and human character, and how things can ultimately kind of right themselves and be okay even in times that feel very wrong. And that was just very significant to me in the year that we worked on this book. So I do have questions for you. I'm sure that the librarians and the people watching will have questions. So I'm not going to spend too much time, because I want everybody to get a chance to ask you questions. But, you know, when we're talking about your books, you've really made your name writing this historical fiction that focuses deeply on 20th century life, and really the women in 20th century and how their roles have adapted and changed over time. This, I think, though, is your first book, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that focuses on like the 1950s and the Cold War. Mm-hmm. And so tell me about, like, how did you come around to doing this time period? Was there something in particular that sparked your interest in tackling this decade?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, obviously, you know, the Summer Wives also takes place partly in the 1950s, mm-hmm. but it's really, that is more of a, you know, a book about a specific culture on a specific island. So it's less about the outside history that's going on. It's kind of taking place in the background. I have long wanted to write about the Cold War because, I mean, partly, you know, I'm Generation X. I was born in 1972. So I am sort of squarely in that generation of, you know, growing up under the shadow of this threat. And then, you know, by the end of the 80s, all of a sudden it's being lifted and the Berlin Wall is coming down and all these things. So these are all very much really part of the fabric of my own childhood. And, you know, they imprint themselves on you. I've always wanted to go into the Cold War, but this was, you know, you think of Cold War fiction and you think, of course, of spy fiction. You know, you think of this very, and stuff that I love to certainly read, you know, these very fast-paced, you know, spy thriller books, which is obviously not what I do. I tend to write that sort of richer fiction about interior lives a lot. There's obviously a lot of action going on, but it's about relationships, and it's about, you know, family relationships, romantic relationships, sort of all kind of woven together into history and what it's like to be a human being living on a historical stage. So my way into, I was sort of, you know, wanting to write about the Cold War, but what is my way in? How do I approach this, you know, with my own, you know, things that I like to write about? And as I love to do when I am procrastinating writing itself, is I love to kind of go on news websites and read those sort of human interest stories. And at one point I was reading a human interest story about one of the members of the so-called Cambridge 5 spy ring, which is certainly something that is more familiar, I think, to the British public than to our public, because they were British spies. Essentially, they were these young men who were sort of the bright young things growing up in the 20s. They went to college in the 1930s and were, you know, they were at Cambridge. Some of them were at Oxford, but mostly Cambridge. And they were clearly these young men who were supposed to graduate and then go into, you know, the foreign service, or to go into these sort of high levels of British government and industry. So very cleverly, there was a sort of a British spy, a Soviet spy recruiter in Britain who was thinking, well, what if I kind of recruit these guys when they're young? They're all very, at that point, very leftist. It was very fashionable to be a communist in the 1930s. Capitalism was demonstrably on the ropes at that point. And Stalin and his team were pretty much masters of the propaganda game. They were sort of presenting the Soviet Union as this, you know, the way of the future. And we didn't really know so much about the purges and what was, you know, and certainly turning a blind eye to all that's going on. So you recruit these young men, and it worked like a charm. They, for the next nearly 20 years, they were funneling information straight to Stalin from the very highest reaches of the British government. And because obviously allies with the Americans from the American side as well. So all this is going on, and they're all fascinating people. And I'm not going to sort of go do a deep dive into that history, but the one that really kind of intrigued me was Donald McLean, because he was, of all of them, probably the most ideologically committed. Kim Philby, you could argue that he really just kind of liked to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. Donald Maclean really suffered that he was betraying not just his country, which if you're British, this is a pretty big deal, to grow up in that culture, that sort of upper middle class culture, to then betray your country is probably the worst thing you can do as a human being. Also betraying your friends, maybe even worse. So he's suffering, and as he's kind of going along, he's becoming more of an alcoholic, and to sort of that psychological torment was fascinating to me, but also his relationship with his wife, who happened to be an American woman. And they met in Paris during the as Hitler was invading France. This is 1940, and fell in love. She gets pregnant. They literally have to flee Paris. They get married just in time, flee Paris. There's this story there, and it turns out she seems to have known about this all along. So all these things are going in my head, like, wow, is she supporting it? Is she just going along with it? Is she actively collaborating with him? And we don't know, because the women's side of the story is so, shrouded. So I'm immediately sort of saying, okay, here's my relationship story, this husband and wife, and he's this traitor. So I thought to myself, well, what if we had what if Stalin's spy masters had tried this in America, had gone to the top American universities and recruited young men who were communists? Again, this was fashionable as much in America as in Britain, and recruited these young men to be spies. We know actually there were quite a few, communists and spies for Stalin. Within the American establishment at the time. What if there was this same program as with the Cambridge Five and they reached those same high levels? So I created a fictional American Donald Maclean, and I created a woman who becomes his wife. And that story is combined with the story of the twin sister of this wife, who goes off to search for her sister when things go wrong with the spy and his wife. So that's kind of the imaginative leap that I took in order to tell this story in a fictional way, and certainly the way that I love to tell stories, which is to combine that sense of suspense and spies and espionage, that propulsive plot, with the richness of historical fiction, where you get that sense of time and place, and most of all, this sense of relationships and what it is like to be a human being living in historic times.
I really feel like for so many Americans, the kind of iconic image of women in the 50s is this very like June Cleaver, happy housewife. The war ended, the women went back to the domestic sphere and then kind of had to fight their way out later. So the women in this book are really refreshing, and it focuses on two sisters, and Ruth and Iris, who are very different. Although you find out maybe not quite as different as you might think. But tell us a little bit about the role of the women and kind of the sister story in this too, because you do write family dramas that really in a lot of your other books talk about family relationships and how they are writ large in all the events that take place historically. But in this case, it's this really, to me, felt very affecting relationship that plays out against this much larger backdrop of like international spies and lies and danger.
Yes. So I always kind of go back. I had this amazing grandmother, my father's mother, who was actually born in Kobe, Japan in, I think, 1916. Grew up in Japan, remembers the great earthquake, and then moved to India. She's British, moved to India to be with her sister, who was newly married and expecting a baby. That's where she met my grandfather, who himself had escaped St. Petersburg. He's half Russian, half British at the beginning of the October Revolution. in 1918. I think is when he fled. So he ended up, in India as an engineer. They married. They ended up in England after the war, once India got its independence. And so she's a fascinating woman. She's just your classic, globe-trotting, adventurous, British woman. And yet, there she was raising her kids in post-war England, which was a fairly bleak place. And so she used, and this was a very, if I read between the lines, because she's British and she's stoic, she doesn't complain. If I read between the lines, this was a pretty dark time for her. She'd had this incredibly fascinating, adventurous life trekking in the Himalayas and doing all kinds of things. And now she's, in like darkest suburban, London for the next 15 years. And she used to tell me that the 20s and 30s were a wonderful time to be a woman, she would say. And then the 50s came, and it's as if we fell asleep. She was very indignant about this. And I think that was partly her own experience. She felt like she'd been, put to sleep for the next 15 years. But also, the women around her had suffered all this stress. She was in India during the Second World War. So she kind of had what they call a good war. She was not bombed. She did not, her husband was deemed too essential to be in the war. He's an engineer. So, she's associated with all these women who just want things to go back to normal before all this trauma was happening. And so for her, it was sort of like they had fallen asleep. For them, it was like they were in this period of recovery from the trauma they had been experiencing. So I'm always fascinated when I look into the 50s, and this is kind of a thread that's true of the Summer Wives as well. What happens to adventurous women when we get to the 1950s? How do they navigate this new cultural landscape with these different expectations that are placed on them? And then the other thing, you overlay, the family situation. And one thing that's fascinating to me, and I have a sister and I dearly love her, but we are certainly very different personality wise. And how much of that is sort of inherent, and how much of that is like, well, these are the expectations that are placed on you because you're a little bit a certain way as a child. So, oh, you're the bad one, you're the good one, you're the, you're this and you're that, and how we play up to those expectations, and how we kind of need those roles to define our own narratives. So, I wanted to kind of take that, and these twin girls, who one is sort of the managing one, and one is kind of the one who goes along with things, but has that sort of very, that sort of steel core to her. She has this strength that nobody really understands, because we think of strength as being this very outward, outgoing thing. Strength can be very quiet. It can be the strength of stamina and endurance. So I wanted to kind of play those off against each other with these two sisters. And then we have, all that taking place on this chessboard of international espionage. And so we have a family loyalty that is, opposing a, patriotism, loyalty to country, your public duty. And to me, that is the most intense conflict. And maybe this is because I was sort of raised on opera, and this is sort of the, the classic struggle is between public duty and private inclination. This is why I write often, so much about a romantic relationship. What if your true love, is in direct opposition to what you are supposed to be doing, your public duty, what is expected of you as a human being? So I love that conflict. And this was such a brilliant way to bring this to life, because you have, such a strong conflict of ideologies and a conflict of countries taking place in the Cold War in a very, as we know, it's the Cold War, it's not a hot war. So in these ways that are very much underneath the surface of public events. So, I thought it's such an ideal war for, to just bring out these feminine things, because it's not people carrying guns and shooting at each other. It is, it is people doing things that are not noticed. Well, who's really good at doing things that are not noticed? Women, because certainly in the 50s, no one was taking them very seriously.
I could just keep going, but I bet Lainey and Virginia, you have questions.
That is so fascinating. I could just sit here and listen to you all day. I mean, just to say that, you
Well-
know, who's best to do something like this where, you know, you can go unnoticed.
Don't underestimate women. I'm
Well,
telling
exactly.
you.
And because, you know, it was the CIA and certainly even the KGB. And one of the reasons I made my, you know, I was sort of halfway through the book and I was like, you know, I really think here's the mice in this. And now I really need to get inside the head of the cat, which is my KGB agent, who I also, actually, no, sorry, KGB officer. I need to use the right nomenclature here. So the officer is the one who is working in the KGB, managing the agents. And so she is sort of the one trying to track down this mole that is inside Moscow. And I deliberately made her a woman as well. You know, because it was so challenging for women to take on these roles at that particular time. And even in the KGB, which you know, in the Soviet Union, obviously during the Second World War, women were taking on some very frontline roles. But, you know, again, after the war, you know, the KGB was very much a masculine place. The CIA, very much a masculine place. So, you know, how do women forge career, you know, and why is it masculine? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? You know, are they missing a few tricks here by not bringing women into the fold? So I really love to play with that and to sort of take that alternative thing and bring what a woman's perspective and a woman's particular abilities are into this. And it's not like there isn't precedent, because there certainly are, you know, women who are taking on roles there, but, you know, it just adds this extra layer of challenge and intrigue and, you know, and I guess deception taking place and the courage as well that is required when you're balancing that and, you know, your ordinary life, you know, presenting yourselves to others.
Folding so much into one. It's a lot of work. Yeah. When we were talking yesterday with Rachel about this, and Lillian Dabney says it's so wonderful to hear about the editor-author relationship. I find it so educational and illuminating about the entire process of publishing a work of art, which this is. And we were talking yesterday, Rachel, about how both of these books are really about, you know, empowering women or just that women are empowering themselves. So let's get to some of the questions. So many fans of yours.
Oh,
very
nice
much
here.
Very
My
much.
wonderful librarians. Thank you.
Yes. These two, Kimberly McGee says these two sisters were so different yet there for each other. I was totally pulled into the Cold War. Renee Wilson says, just curious, is a member of the Schuyler family involved in this book?
Yes, actually, it's Schuyler. It's the Dutch
sorry.
pronunciation, exactly. But no, so yes, I did. You know, I like to sort of not just sort of, I hope, certainly attract new readers, but I also like to leave a few Easter eggs in there for my longtime readers. And of course, the Schuyler family was sort of the, you know, the foundation of my early books, and I love to return to them and find out what they're doing. And in my head, I have all these histories of what they've been doing. And so sometimes, and of course, that's all off the page. So sometimes I like to give you a peek into, you know, these elaborate histories I've constructed for them in my head. So one of the characters who is always fascinated me, who's never had a starring role, and she doesn't have a starring role in this one, would be the three Schuyler sisters. That would be Vivian and Tiny and Pepper. Their mother is quite a piece of work, as they used to say. And I always thought it'd be interesting to sort of catch her at an earlier moment in her history. So I thought, well, what if these twin, you know, and I know she also, I had laid this, you know, sort of trail earlier where, you know, she had not come from as socially prominent a family as the Schuylers. She had a little bit worked, you know, kind of worked her way up socially. So I thought, well, what if I make my two twins, the children of Vivian's younger sister, who her older sister. So Vivian is actually the aunt of these two kids. This is the Vivian Senior, not Vivian of The Secret Life of Violet Grant. Her mother is the aunt. And so she kind of comes in, and I always like to have a truth teller in my books. This is actually a sort of a fascinating thing I came across once. Somebody was making the case that and it was sort of Shakespeare related, how the nurse in Romeo and Juliet and how Emilia in Othello is they're such satisfying characters because they're the ones who come in at the end and look at all the dead bodies and say, you idiots, did you not understand that this was what was going on? They're the truth tellers. They're the ones who explain everything to everyone. And they're so satisfying because you finally kind of get to that, that truth, and everybody's sort of aghast at what they've done. This is the kind of the conscience of the book. And so I love sometimes inserting that type of character. And Vivian is certainly not a soft, sweet truth teller at all. She's somebody who's, she is somebody who could have been probably, a lawyer. She could have been, in another era, would have maybe ascended to the heights of a profession, but instead, she is this society woman. And so she can be a bit bitter and abrasive and have very strong opinions, but she's also the one who kind of calls people out on things. So I brought her in to sort of nudge certain characters in a certain direction and to, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but sort of, Iris, who undergoes this transformation during the book, there's this very sort of essential part of the book, which takes place in kind of this middle section in the late 1940s. And she needs to undergo a transformation. And so Vivian, I kind of bring her in to sort of help be one of the catalysts for this transformation of Iris. So she plays a very essential role, a small role, and she helps to, I think, hopefully fill in some of those gaps in the Schuyler family history that my readers are always interested in taking a look at.
Beautiful. We love the Easter eggs. I'm sorry, that's the Schuyler family's name. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. I mean, if you're okay to go over for a couple of minutes.
I am the thing. I'm right in the middle of
order a pizza.
Finishing up a book right now, so I don't have a lot of social interaction, and so talking about anything right now is wonderful, but also, for a subject that I'm so passionate about, I ended up turning, sorry, Rachel, and the manuscript was late, not just because of COVID, but because I just was so caught up in the research for this thing. It was very hard to sort of walk away from the books and everything and really, work on the manuscript. Because there are so many wrinkles and I kept coming across new little nuggets of information that just like, oh wait, now I have to do this, so I love talking about it. I'm certainly not the world's expert, but I think it was certainly fun to bring, let's just say a woman's perspective to this genre of, Cold War spy fiction. Let's put it that way.
Rachel, so because as you're saying, Beatrice, there are so many different then this bit, but then there's that, and I don't want to leave that out. And here's that wrinkle. How does that work with the two of you? Rachel, how does that work when, I'd love to know myself, the process of going back and forth, and how many times are you doing that? And how do you decide, look, we've got to stop at some point. And, I'm curious, as I'm sure everybody watching is, just based on that alone, what Beatrice just said.
So yeah, I think one of the things that I love about Beatrice's work is that it is really tightly plotted. She's working on a broad canvas, so there's multiple characters, different plot twists, there's Easter eggs. I always like to challenge myself to pick up all of the Easter eggs from her other books with other characters who I recognize, and then I'm really proud of myself when I do, and then I'll drop one and I'll realize oh wow, how did I not see that? I think a lot of what we do in our work is I go through and read, and I'm really like the cold reader, which sometimes as an editor is the most important thing that you can do for an author, because the author has been so deeply immersed in this world and working out all of these twists and adding new twists and moving things around and adding new pieces of information. And at a certain point, you really need someone else to come in and look at it and make sure that it all works well. So I'm functioning as a cold reader in that sense. And I usually I go through and I read and I make notes if there's something that I really like, that I want more of, or I want a certain character to be expanded, or if there are questions raised about certain characters or in certain scenes. There are definitely times where I'll say, like, I think that should be a scene. If there's something that kind of is an aside or part of the backstory, I'm like, wow, I really think like you could do a whole scene there. You know, and so I go back to Beatrice and I say, like, these are all the things that, these are all my feelings about what I think would make this work even better, or these are questions that were raised. Beatrice introduced me to the term, and now I use it all the time, of dead rabbits. Did you come up with dead rabbits, Beatrice?
I don't know how I came up with that term actually, but yeah,
It's super useful.
basically-
It's like, it's something that kind of comes up in the beginning and then drops out and kind of goes nowhere. For example, like if you have a character who sort of says, my name's Bob, but they always call me Tom. And then like throughout the book, no one calls him Tom, like that. That's sort of a dead rabbit where you think like, well, that just never went anywhere. You know, so like there's those kinds of little things that editors just pick up on, and really they just pick up on them because they're fresh eyes. And then there's the work that I was talking about before, where it's like, what is the quintessence of this book? And I find with Beatrice in particular, all I really have to do is kind of write up the notes and line them up and send them her way. And then she will not only tackle those notes, but also sometimes in the process of doing that, I think you get like inspired to do other things. Like I'm thinking about that scene that you wrote at the end of The Golden Hour with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor at the very end of the book, which wasn't in the original draft or even the second draft. And then just you were inspired, and now I can't imagine that book ending any other way. So sometimes it's kind of being the person who helps prime the engine is also part of the editor's job. And I think I'm very lucky with Beatrice that sometimes I inadvertently like spark inspiration and something even better comes out, but it's just part of the interaction between the writer and the editor as this really committed reader. You know, you're like the super fan, and you're also just reading something really deeply, and it's often for the first time, and then all the things come out of that lead to a better book.
Yeah, you know, and I tend to be kind of a perfectionist, so I don't usually send it to Rachel until I feel like it's the best I can make it at that point. And then Rachel, you know, for example, you know, even in this book, Rachel, remember you were saying, well, I think we had originally started off with the KGB officer.
Right.
And you said, this is a great voice, but it's kind of you know, she's a bit cold. And maybe this isn't the best voice to start the book with. And I said, and I was like, well, I don't understand how can I start? And then I realized, well, actually I can start with, you know, Ruth, who's sort of the twin who's gone off to find her sister. And maybe I can start at a different point. And I don't want to give away too much, but I don't know if I hope it's not too much of a spoiler to say that it was such an amazing, and I think that first scene just worked so well. And it turned, as you know, it's actually the last scene in the book. And that's, you know, and then everything all kind of falls in after that. And then but it was just such a great way to start the book, you know, with the start the book with the ending, and then work your way through there. But luckily it doesn't give away spoilers, but it was a much more propulsive way to kind of draw the reader into the story, so you know what the story's about. And then switch to the KGB officer who is, you know, has her own set of psychological traumas from having endured Stalin's purges and all that. So, you know, it was such a great idea. We knew that it wasn't the right place to start, and Rachel knew, but it was like, it sort of took that for me to get the idea of, oh, wait a minute, we could start the book in this way. And it's kind of a fresh, you know, structural way to look at this book. And so that often happens where I'm like, okay, I know this doesn't quite work, but I'm not sure what will work. And Rachel will suggest something, and that sparks something in me. So it's a great, you know, I think at this point, we just have a great way of working with each other. I mean, Rachel trusts me enough to just kind of let me write it and hand it it off to her. And then, she'll tell me where, I think there was only one book, and that was Cocoa Beach, where I was like, something is really wrong with this ending. I don't know what it is. I'm just going to send it to you with this not quite finished ending and tell me what you think I need to do here. And that was like the one time when I really sent it to you being like, I have no clue here. I really need a helping hand. But, Rachel always just comes in and makes it the best book then that it can be. And, she knows that when I tell her this is my original idea for the book, she knows it's going to be something completely different by the time.
It usually is.
She gets it, but
there's just a lot of chocolate and a lot of, a lot of close reading. And we just get it. We get it done. We get it done every time, every year, which is really like, I also just want to say that writing a really, really good book every year is the most difficult. I mean, I think librarians who are good readers have some sense of this. It is so hard. And even, I think Beatrice is unique in that her books just deliver year after year. And it's like Michael Jordan scoring 60 points in every game. Like that is just, you have to be so talented and so energetic and have such stamina to be able to do that. And I have worked with book a year authors. I've worked with authors who have more than one book a year. And, some of them are better than others because as human beings, we are rarely inspired in the same way or have the same amount of psychological energy or physical energy to do those things every year. And I am always amazed that Beatrice not only does, these big books every summer, they're always A+, and then also does other projects like the Teen W books. And, we have a new book that's going to come out in the fall. That's another book in the Wicked City series. So you heard it here first, that she also wrote during the pandemic. And it's amazing. And it was such a gift to me because it's really fun and fast-paced.
I didn't tell Rachel I was working on this.
It was
November,
here, I have this book for you.
Surprise! I wrote the third Wicked City book, and and so sorry, that's not even fully public out there, but yes, that will be out in, I don't think we have an exact date yet, but we'll be releasing those details soon. But yes, I just was like, happy holidays.
There you go. I know. And I think I think that's, in all the years that I've been doing this, which is 25 now.
You must have started really, very, very young.
I started right in high school and just kept going. I really feel like Beatrice is so at the top of her game in terms of consistently doing these really, really good books. And they're not all the same. They don't, it's not like she's writing a series where you can kind of just fire up the engine and keep going. They're all really A+, beautifully thought out works of art that also are just incredibly entertaining. So I'm probably preaching to the choir because I know how much librarians love.
I'm almost crying over here. So
I know, but look, I mean, it's still going to be a couple more months before we get together. So at least I can see you and say these things. But yes, so this book is A+, and everybody should run out and get it and read it and tell people about it.
Well,
great cover too. Love this cover.
Love the cover. Love the jacket. Yeah. Love it. I mean, there are so many more questions. And Beatrice, I'm assuming that you would go on to your Facebook page and answer those. Would that be okay? Because
yes, I can absolutely do that. Yes.
Questions, and we have time because we just have so many. Everybody who's asked a question will be getting a copy of the book. And there are just so much love the conversations. This has been fantastic. You'll see yourself. I mean, there's like I said, there's endless love for you and for the books. And also, Lady, did you want to ask the one last question between Maureen and Kim, I think it was? And then
there's so much love. One person was like, "You're my favorite author to recommend to patrons."
Thank you.
Maureen Roberts asked I've had it in my head, and then so
that's okay. Can help you.
she said, how did you develop such a passion for writing historical fiction? And that might go into Kim McGee's question, which is what you're working on next.
So history has always been my thing. I've always, I was almost a history major, but I'm also, there's this contrarian streak to me. Like I don't want to, and the history department was really big. I didn't want to be just another history major. So I ended up combining a bunch of things and being officially an anthropology major and then doing the humanities honors program just so that, you know, I was not just like a straight history major. And, you know, so history's been, you know, I was about to say a passion of mine, which is a bit of a cliche because it's not even so much a passion as just, it's just a part of who I am and a fascination with not just history, but how, I guess the things that happen in history are still a part of us. They are still part of who we are. It is this story of how we got to where we are today and how these people who lived in the past are really us. I mean, if we had just been born in a different century, we would be like them. And so I am always trying to understand the humanity of, and to, if there's one thing I try to do in my books, all of my books, whatever the subject, is to bring out, to get people to understand the humanity of people who lived 100 years ago and who we know as, you know, two-dimensional black and white images, not as real people who are in fact just like us. So that's, you know, that's just who I am. And that is, you know, I never really considered doing anything but some form of historical fiction, whether there's also maybe sometimes a modern day character that we I use to sort of illustrate that universality of human nature. So that's, I guess, the why, you know, and anything else I was doing in the business world was just sort of a way to have a, you know, it is, I think, an act of courage to write a book that goes out in the public domain. You know, there's Virginia reading out the review to me and my heart's like, oh my God, I hope you liked it. You know, it's you know, it's an act of courage, and it was not something that I was ready to do when I was younger, is to put that out there in the world. And now that I'm older and have a little more confidence, and I have, you know, a children and family who still need me, even if my books are terrible, then that was only the point at which I was able to have the courage to do this. And so I am, first of all, incredibly grateful to be doing this for a living. Have, of course, this wonderful editor who, you know, who is such a great, you know, fit for me and understands what I'm doing, and all you librarians out there who recommend my books. And I am incredibly, I try every morning, even when I am struggling with a particular book or did not get the review I was hoping for. You know, I always go back to how grateful I am to be doing this at all. This is really all I ever wanted to do in my life, was to write historical fiction. What am I working on now? So I originally had this idea. This is actually the book I'm writing now. There is actually a third sibling. Ruth and Iris, my twin sisters, have an older brother named Harry. And I wanted to do a book about Harry, and it was going to be Harry and the Cold War. And somewhere along the way, so there was going to be a woman in his life who was involved in the German resistance. And the book, and Rachel's hearing this for the first time because she thinks
this is all new. Like, you guys are hearing it at the same time.
She's like, wait a minute, I thought the book was about
Harry. I know nothing going into
Harry. But it ended up, once I went down I did not realize, you know, German, we focus so much on the French resistance. And there's this idea that the Germans were too, I guess, intimidated by the Nazi regime to have much of a resistance. Well, there was. And once I went down that rabbit hole, I just couldn't, you know, stop. So the book is kind of, Rachel, I'm telling this to you because you'll be getting it in a few weeks when I'm done with it. The book is really more about her, my German resistance, you know, fighter, and of course, you know, Harry's in there too, and Harry does get his piece, but it's a little bit more like 70% her and 30% him. And there is a Cold War element that goes back and forth between the Cold War and the Second World War. So Harry gets so little notice. And the other thing, I very rarely write from the perspective of a man, and I kind of wanted to do that a little bit. So part of the book is written from Harry's perspective. We don't actually get much sense of Harry in Our Woman in Moscow. He just kind of appears conveniently when he's needed. We don't even just really describe him very much, as I realized when I was, as I was starting this book. We don't really know anything much about Harry, other than he's very devoted to his sisters. He seems like a nice guy and probably handsome, and he drives a red convertible. So that was kind of all I had to go on. And also he's an orphan. So it was great to realize who Harry was. And it was also great to investigate all this. If you think it was brave to be in the French resistance, I mean, if you were in the heart of Berlin and, their Gestapo headquarters is around the corner, these people were unbelievable. And I had to stop at some point. I just kind of went down that rabbit hole. This was not supposed to be a German resistance book, and ended up kind of being a bit of a German resistance book, but with a lot of a Cold War element as well.
I love that Rachel just got that info from you now.
She just sends me
Rachel.
stuff.
That's hilarious.
You can, this is also like, I have a couple of authors who, I've worked with for a really long time. I absolutely trust them. It's going to be good. And I'm just like, okay, lay it on me.
Listen,
there's a reason. If they weren't good at it, I wouldn't let them do it.
It wasn't supposed to be a gotcha question. So I'm sorry.
Actually, and the reason why I was exploring this, and because it does connect with what I was doing in Our Woman in Moscow, because one element of the Second World War that fascinated me is that, you have, people in Eastern Europe who are resisting the Nazis, people in Germany who are resisting the Nazis. And all they got for their trouble was, Stalin taking over after the war. So it was kind of like out of the frying pan into the fire. And that, understanding the dilemma that, of course, Allied leaders were in, because, of course, they needed Stalin in order to win the war at all. So they had to throw him bones. But the people who were those bones that were thrown to Stalin, I mean, what an act of betrayal. They are risking their lives to get rid of Hitler. And then they end up under the yoke of communism for the next 40 years. So I wanted to explore that, and this is how I'm exploring that. And I think that by showing the risks and sacrifices they made in the Second World War, in involving themselves so dangerously in the resistance, and then finding out that in fact, Eastern Europe had been handed over to the Soviets.
Yeah,
I think was, that's a pretty, you don't have the, that bittersweet happy ending so much as you do in the World War II, where, okay, we, made all these sacrifices and we lost our loved ones, but now we live in freedom, well, in this case, no, you don't get to live in freedom now, and so I really wanted to explore that and the tragedy of that, but, with, an ending that I hope will be certainly satisfying, but it was, talk about going into a rabbit hole with this one. It's really, I'm very excited about it as well. So, but again, continuing those same themes that I'm exploring here in Our Woman in Moscow, and what communism and I guess the totalitarianism of the 20th century did to people, which it's easy to forget what it really did to people and generations.
Well, I think that what's important here is that within the pages of this novel, you've illustrated some really very powerful points about what people went through, about loyalty and disloyalty, and family and country. You know what, unfortunately we could go on for forever, because
everyone's quite tuned out by now, but
no, they're not. It's fascinating.
Beatrice is going off again.
Your relationship, writer and editor, is truly fascinating. 13 books together, and the trust bond between the two of you, the familiarity. I mean, this is, I find that fascinating. I really do. When an editor and an author just this, consistently have this trust and knowledge and expectation and delivering, and what you have with each other and how you help each other, and explore ideas and how to turn things around when they're not just quite on the track that you want them to be on. I find that fascinating. Rachel, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak to your authors, our authors, and all of the librarians about both of these books, both of these authors. Is really, really so interesting. Two different points of view and periods in time, and what people went through. I know it's really quite fascinating. Beatrice, Our Woman in Moscow goes on sale June 1st. Library Reads votes due May 1st. And again, we have Camille Aubray's book, The Godmothers, which goes on sale June 15th. Again, Library Reads votes are due May 1st. We thank you both. Don't forget to go to the Edelweiss page for Our Woman in Moscow and check out the Behind the Book piece. It's really fantastic. Both authors' websites are chock full. So talking about going down the rabbit hole, Beatrice, thank you
Yes.
so much. It is fascinating, and we can't share our appreciation enough for you. Lainey, any thoughts before we say goodbye?
So lovely. And thank you, Rachel, for
Oh,
joining
thanks
me
for
this
having me.
evening.
Anytime.
It was really, really interesting. What a wonderful perspective and a wonderful relationship. And thank you both so much. Librarians, thank you for watching. And we'll see you next time on Door to Door.
Bye.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.